Okay, so I have the two breakout rooms then for people to, you can just select into which one you want. And it's just basically field or kitchen. And so the field obviously will be for people to ask questions and yeah, talk about just like if you're growing Perilla, if you're interested in growing Perilla. And then the kitchen will be, yeah, the place where you guys can share recipes and come up with maybe interesting innovations and then share it with us kind of back. So I'm opening all the rooms now. And I think, are you all able to see and choose the room you want to be in?
Okay.
Okay.
I would like to ask about the seeds.
Nova, I was going to say that there is a pest that really actually loves the Perilla, which is slugs. We had one year where like slugs just wiped out every plant. Like as soon as I like watch my field religiously and I'd be like, okay, I can see the cotyledons come up. And then just the next day, they just completely munched. And so stayed out at night. And it was like a zombie apocalypse where they just like, as soon as the sun went down, they all just came up from the surface. And I like watched a slug open its mouth and just like eat the Perilla. But they, yeah, were voracious. Like I tried leaving other things for them. And it was a bleak time to be a slug hunter, staying out at the farm basically until midnight and throwing them in jars of beer. But I did find out that slugs, if you have to try to lure them into beer, they prefer Tecate, and they don't like high life.
What?
Someday I'll write a long integrated pest management report about the beer preferences of slugs. My coworker also worked at Whole Foods, and he used to get me like some Whole Foods brand of beer because it was like I could buy a case of it with his discount for like $1. And the slugs absolutely refused it. So
they only want good beer.
yeah, or they want like a mid-range beer. They don't, you know, it seemed like it insulted them that I would try to just give them like a Whole Foods brand of beer. They're just like,
like, why? There's like much better beer.
exactly.
So they just head towards the beer?
Yeah, they just are drawn to it and then essentially just drown in it. And I felt like that's kind of a humane death. Like,
yeah,
I could think of a way to go out, you know, compared to other things.
Then you should give them better beer, probably. Yeah. That was like something
okay.
Nice too.
Does anybody want to give a little report back from what you talked about in your small group rooms, like any really amazing recipes or things that you feel like everybody needs to be eating at home with their Perilla, or just important tips for, you know, growing them in the garden? Everyone's going to be very secretive about all the things we should do with Perilla. I get it. It's very grandma-ish of all of you to just keep it tightly guarded what we should be doing. Does anyone from either group have questions for the other group, since the field and the kitchen are not mutually exclusive most times?
I can share a recipe that I had today with kimbap. Yeji made it, and it was a kimbap that had the leaves were kind of on the older side, like probably like 2 weeks after harvest, and so it just had like a nice texture to it, and they just rolled it up in the kimbap, and they had like soybean in it, and also like a sweet and savory squid. It's really good just to taste the like sweet with the meatiness. Also, I want to like call out Hi because they have like so many great recipes, and I would love to hear just one if you feel like sharing. Hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, cool. Hi everyone. Sorry, I need to join by audio. I actually don't know who's exactly everyone who's on, but I think I heard Kristen earlier. Hi everyone who's on. Also I want to like before I share, actually, I don't know if there's anyone else in the group who didn't share. I feel like I shared a lot, so I don't want to like. Did anyone else who was there wanted to share?
Hi, I think I've seen in the chat, and then Emily just said, it sounds like everyone wants to pressure you a little to share.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi everyone. So yeah, I grew up with. I'll share. Okay, I'll summarize what I shared. um, let's see. So Tieto is the how the way that my family and I we would use to describe Perilla and the type of seed that grows in Vietnam. And Tia, which means Tia, the rough translation is Tia. Tia means kind of sawtoothed or pointed, and To, which is bowl. So Tieto, which means like a leaf that looks like a bowl that has sawtooth edges. um, and traditionally it has one side is leans more green and the other side leans more purple. Um, and I have honestly, like, I don't know if y'all like, I don't know if you all resonate with this, but sometimes it's like really hard to describe cultural things or just things that you grew up with in English. But I'm gonna try. Like you don't like it's like one of those herbs where or and one of those foods where you only really know until you taste it and you're like, oh, that's like my thing, or like that's like my Viet like taste Viet because it's just like what you knew of it. Um and so that's like how I would it's just so hard to describe, but if I had to describe it, yeah, it's like a little bit more like lemony minty. I feel like I feel like it's like nutty. I feel like if I had to describe what a prism like tastes like Tieto is like what maybe one of the things that it would taste like. And then some of the like kind of the ways that I grew up with it were uh, honestly used fresh. So whether that was rolled with like other fresh herbs and lettuce and cucumber in fried things. So like fried rice roll, like fried rice rolls, or like fried like sweet potatoes with shrimp, um, and like fried. But I don't know if people know banseo. It's like a turmeric, coconut milk, rice paper. Uh, I don't want. Yeah, it's like kind of like you like put it on a pan, you put that batter on a pan, and then you put traditionally it's like with shrimp and pork and mung beans uh and bean sprouts, and you fold it in half and then you like wrap it in herbs including perilla, and you dip it in nikmam cham, which is a fish sauce, garlic, lime, chili dip. Let's see, other uses for perilla. I like to make tito nung, which is to, there's like a base kind of, there's a base ground pork mix, which is with like, it has shallot and garlic and fish sauce and ground pepper. And you mix that up and then you like roll it in perilla and then you grill it. And then a vegan version that I've done is I like release water from tofu and then I double fry it and then I mix it in that marinade of same marinade of like shallot, garlic, pepper, and then I add soy sauce. And then I like roll it in perilla and then I grill that. And then the last recipe that I shared with the group, I don't know if folks have ever had it, but I started noticing it in the streets of Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam on my last 2 visits to the homeland, which is bánh tráng trộn. And bánh tráng means rice paper, and trộn means to roll or to toss. And it's essentially a rice paper salad that's tossed. And if it's okay, can I talk about liver? I have to ask every time because sometimes it's like a little bit complicated. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah, it's okay to
Okay.
talk about it.
Okay. Okay. So imagine like cooked liver and then different dried meat things. So like squid, shrimp, sometimes it's like chicken, fish, and then you take dried rice paper and then you cut it into strips, and then also imagine like perilla, rau ram, really any like herb that you have, and then you take the sauce that was cooked that like came out of the cooked liver, and you mix that with fish sauce or soy sauce and garlic, and you toss that over everything that I just mentioned, and then add like roasted peanuts and fried shallot and fried garlic. Toss that up really high up in the air. At least I do, because I feel like that's like connected to like the sky. And you toss that, and then to me, I feel like the kind of all the cooked proteins mixed with like really fresh herbs, and then with this like dried rice paper that becomes like chewy and soft and absorbs all of the flavor, becomes this really refreshing salad, or really just refreshing, I don't know, like mix of things that are really nice on a summer day. So I've just been making them pretty much at least like every 3-4 days. And honestly, like I do it with whatever I have. Like it doesn't have to be those things. Like if you don't have liver, that's fine. If you don't like certain things, that's fine. But I think what's really true is, or what's really amazing in it is fresh herbs, and Perilla is such a nice like addition to that. And so I've done like substitutions for I've done like added fruit, and I've added I've added like eggs, or I've added like whatever you have on hand. I think the keys are usually the sauce and the rice paper, but honestly those things can be subbed out or subbed in for things too. Okay, sorry. I feel like I'm gonna stop, y'all. I don't know what's going on in the chat. I don't know if it's popping. I don't know if there's crickets. I don't know if there's crickets, but I'm gonna stop.
Sounds good. Hi.
Someone
Oh my gosh, is
suggested
that
in the-
Judy?
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
I think there was a request for you to have a cooking show, so I think we should think about how to make that happen. We got video
Yeah, I'm
support
down.
courtesy of Emily Encina, so you can really
I'm
bust it
in.
out.
Yes.
There was a lot of good questions, too, about the seeds and everything. So we have, until 5:30 roughly. Like I think we can stay after if people want to continue talking about a lot of this stuff. And on the Mighty Networks, we still have the recipe section where people hopefully will post some of what you shared and talked about, just so that you can continually access that since Perilla season still has a little while to go. I'm gonna share just a quick little presentation just to kind of walk through some of the obligatory science that's part of Seed Stewards. So just trying to kind of talk a little bit about Perilla just as a genus, because I think also there's a lot of misunderstandings. And then we have a special guest, Elokin, the amazing herbalist, Shooting Star Botanicals, my personal family doctor, and just, kind of just a really potent medicine maker and healer. And fortunately, they agreed to tell us a little bit about just the medicinal wonders of Perilla, since it's something we haven't covered too much, but is largely responsible for like one of the main reasons it's this kind of ancient, beloved plant through so much of Asia. And so they're going to talk to us about the Perilla medicine cabinet. And I will try to get that started by 5 for Loken. But I'm going to share my screen now, and we're just going to do a quick little slideshow. Let's see. All right, can people see this? Okay, I called my presentation, Don't Bring Your Halmoni Shiso. Basically, don't bring your Korean grandma shiso, because actually it's inspired by a story Rana shared last year about accidentally bringing her grandma shiso and being outraged, which I think is actually a pretty shared experience. So I wanted to use this just as a way to kind of talk a little bit about, Perilla chemotypes, and then what we're calling subspecies specificity. And we'll get into kind of just what that means right now. So Perilla, when it's sort of, we see it out in the world, and in Western taxonomy, Perilla is considered like a single species genus. So it's all kind of classified. It's been called different things throughout history, but right now it's classified as Perilla frutescens. And then in your workbook, you would have seen that we actually kind of parse it out into a couple different subspecies. And we did that just because as Perilla started to kind of be introduced to people who aren't as familiar with it, like these are from different seed catalogs. But I think one of the things that I know Jane, who's a farmer in this group, had been messaging me about is like, how do we get people to stop calling kene shiso, like when we put in the CSA box? And for a lot of farmers, like it's just something, and I think as a Korean American, it's just something that, brings up a certain pride to just have this be differentiated from shiso. And so the question then is like, what is about sort of that nationalist pride and acknowledgement of, just not wanting to kind of conflate everything to being this false monolith, right? And then what is actually biologically different? When is it a matter of semantics, where it's like, perhaps there's lots of different names and lots of different languages for different crops, but when do those names actually mean that it's a distinct kind of cultivar, that it's genetically and morphologically distinct from other varieties? So here you can see the top portion is from Johnny's seeds, and where the whole Perilla section just is called different types of shiso. And so this kind of points to some of the shortcomings in terms of the creation of that monolith being due to sort of like the perception of who the audience is, right? So Johnny's is mostly serving a lot of people who probably just know Perilla as shiso. It's a fairly new introduction. It's gained a little bit of more popularity in more recent years with kind of small diversified growers. So it all gets kind of called shiso. Below it, we have Kitazawa, where there's a little bit more variation and a little bit more understanding of distinction. But here we also have some things related to language that are shortcoming, because instead of who the audience is, where Kitazawa perceives its audience obviously as more Asian American, but here a lot of the names are tied to who's producing the seed, and that is like a smaller handful of companies. So if you see here, what in the red and green shiso section, the name Jok Sam Ip is basically like red sam leaf. And that's the Vietnamese cultivar that Kitazawa carries. but it has this Korean name because it's coming from a Korean seed broker. And so you have all these different layers of questioning what's a matter of semantics, where are things getting lost in translation, and where is that translation largely due to kind of the marketplace, either because of what the expectation of the consumer is or upstream who the producer of the seed is. So I wanted to touch on just a little bit about the actual biology and physiology of Perilla and what does make it distinct. Because for me, it was a good question, like, oh, am I just being defensive because I don't like how a lot of Korean vegetables just get called by Japanese names, because Japanese food has more social currency in somewhere like the US than Korean food does, that people generally have less knowledge about kind of Korean culture. Or is there actually some merit that people have these really strong kind of identities wrapped around their Perilla varieties? And is there something more to it? So if we look at the actual chemistry of Perilla, instead of being classified as that one monolith under just the banner of Perilla frutescens, and we break it out into what are called chemotypes. And chemotypes just are based on distinctions that are related to proportions of essential oils in the plant body. So actually, for the most part, in most of Asia, Perilla is seen as a more complex genus, broken into these kind of broad chemotypes. And most of the Perilla that we consume as food or medicine fall under either the PA or PK type, where the PA type, the primary constituent is perillaldehyde, and the PK type, the major component is Perilla ketone. So PA types are mostly eaten as kind of fresh herbs. So that's where you find like, yeah, shiso, tieto. PK types are the ones where the seed is used for oil. And so that's kainip and dilke, and the types of Perilla that we heard about in Manipur, like from Zeno and Hillwild. And then there are a bunch of other smaller types that have lots of other interesting combinations. So this is kind of one way to look at the actual genome of Perilla and understand that when we call them these different names, it actually does speak to these different combinations, because the way that we interpret this combination of essential oils is through flavor and aroma. So that's why, like shiso isn't actually just a pretty straightforward substitute for tieto, for kainip. It's because there's lots of different types of chemical signatures that signal to us those different flavors that pair differently with the types of foods and recipes that we're cooking with them. And this has been mostly a point of interest in East Asia, and that's where we had to really look for a lot of this research, just because in the West, it's still kind of, the things that start to become popular are usually centered around a certain type of utility. And it's certainly not considering like these historic perspectives of food culture and things. But in East Asia, there's been a lot of incentives to have a lot more research around Perilla, just because it has this really long history of cultivation. It's extremely important to so many communities, and especially in terms of like attempts to kind of standardize different things related to traditional Chinese medicine, Eastern medicine. There's been a lot more research into breaking down and sequencing the Perilla genome, where in somewhere like the US, most research is not going to go into this because it's just not seen as economically viable. So here I just wanted to show a little bit of these interesting things, where the first two slides are trying to find parts of the genome that are responsible for how the kind of purple or red pigmentation occurs in Perilla. So they found two different pathways, and they tried to find essentially here where these markers are on different parts of that genome, to kind of distinguish, is there actually something in the genetics between these different varieties, between Perilla frutescens, variety viridis, variety acuta, and variety crispa, that actually shows up as a different expression of the gene. So they took these two different markers, looked at those pathways, and then sequenced that into this with analyzing dry herb matter, to see, like, when they buy dried herbs from their doctor or from the herbal market, are there key differences in terms of the potency of that medicine? Because again, like, as we've moved through history and as our relationships and as these stories have been told and retold or dropped at different points, where this misinformation can bear the most impact is, in the potency of this medicine, and are there certain types that are better suited for us in the treatment of different ailments. And so they really wanted to look at and break apart the genome for that reason. So this just kind of, basically the synthesis of this report was to just say, that actually between all of these different subspecies, they have really different pathways for even something like anthocyanin, like the red and purple pigment, that is largely what attributes like all of these potent medicinal properties, but those different pathways show up in different ways that have different utility as food and medicine. And I can link to all of this if anyone wants to look at this more detailed report. So some of the key terms I also wanted to talk about, because to me, like Perilla is a really great way for us to also understand that the language of science can be the sort of love language, essentially. Like we can kind of learn, and even though like the language I'm using here is like a kind of Western scientific modality, to me, like learning about the science and the pathways of all of this with Perilla tells me a story of just like companionship and of like this very deep relationship between these different communities that have stewarded Perilla for centuries. And so one of the words that the kind of vocabulary we wanted to throw out is, so we understand chemotype, and that's kind of the core of different Perilla subspecies, their essential oils, the things that give them flavor and aroma. Phenotype is what we're looking at here, which is just like its physical appearance, what it looks like, leaf shape, like how Hai was talking about, like, oh, there's different ways of talking about the leaf margins. Is it curly? Is it flat? So here on the left is my, Korean Perilla. And on the right is, I grew out some of Zeno's seeds from her Perilla varieties from Ukkarul from Northeast India. And so in a lot of ways at a glance, they look very similar, like leaf shape is very similar. It has that characteristic heart-shaped leaf. You can see in hers, it's very, very fuzzy. And that was like one of the most noticeable differences. It's covered in these fine hairs, and the stem, it looks like completely blurry because there's so many of those small trichomes on it. So even though, yes, these are both classified, they're both Perilla frutescens, variety frutescens. They are both PK types of Perilla, and they both look very similar, but if you could smell them, they smell entirely different. So it's just to say, we're kind of winnowing out and looking, imagining as a family tree. You have like all of these different kind of ways of classifying, but even within there, it's just to say cultivars begin to evolve very differently. And it makes a lot of sense. Like the Kinip has a much stronger aroma. Like if you walk through the Perilla patch in the middle of the day, it smells super strong. And these guys, when you rub the leaves, the scent is much milder and there's not too much flavor to it. And so even if I had given you stacks of these different leaves, like once you taste it and smell it, you would notice, hey, this is entirely different. And this is just for us to be able to talk about this idea that we've heard a lot about on the Mighty Network, and we're going to continue to talk about because it's the heart of seed saving in our relationship with plants, is this idea of selection, right? And so selection is just basically that kind of like continual reinforcement of traits that you kind of experience in this give and take and this reciprocal relationship with a plant as a farmer, where you notice things and you kind of reinforce those traits through continuing to propagate seeds saved from plants that reflect the traits that you find desirable. And so if you think about the domestication pathways from like the Himalayas in China, where maybe these different species of Perilla have a common ancestor, but as they kind of met different people in different places that preferred different things and utilize their leaves and seeds for different means, those genetics start to diverge and start to amplify different traits and different combinations. So I think that that's something that's really sweet, is just the particularities of people and their attachments to their types of Perilla isn't just about like a kind of bullheaded nationalism. It's about kind of like this sweet relationship of how culture kind of lived and evolved and informed plant genetics and human communities kind of in this back and forth. So just to kind of plant that seed in our heads, like this idea of selection is kind of that act of like communion and noticing and kind of continuing to come towards one another and things becoming less wild, not because we're asserting control over one another, but because we are loving and caring for each other. And so within Perilla, essentially it started as a series of wild species. The center of diversity is in different parts of China. So that's where you can still see in the wild the most forms of different kinds of Perilla. So the wild species are on the left, Perilla citriodora, Hertella, and citoyensis. The cultivated forms are all classified as Perilla frutescens again. And so the main thing, the difference between these are wild species are what's called a diploid. And so in their nucleus, they have 24 sets of chromosomes. Cultivated forms ended up being tetraploid with 48 sets of chromosomes in their nucleus. So that doubled the amount of genetic information on a cellular level. And that process going from diploid to tetraploid is called polyploidy. And that is a key term to look at that kind of encompasses like so many of our domesticated crops and how they came to be from like a wild ancestor. And so if you think of like corn, right, we know its ancestor is teosinte, like these kind of small cobs with like very small kernels, and how it evolved into corn with like these nice kind of big kernels that evolved in all these different ways is a process of polyploidy. Wheat, rice, all of these other things that evolved from ancient grasses, polyploidy. It's this act of having a sort of big impact mutation where a plant suddenly emerges in one generation to have an extra set of genetic material and information and is stabilized because of that human care. And so this is kind of to just, try to, if there's any sort of big message to send through this weird slideshow, is that a lot of times we think about plant domestication as like this sense of domination, right? Like there's like this kind of edge to agriculture that in some ways has been about asserting control over nature. But I think that there's like a story, a different story to that, that's about, care and reciprocity. And I think that this concept, the scientific concept of polyploidy to me speaks a lot to that, because to have a mutation happen, could create lots of diversity, but it becomes really meaningful when it then gets reflected back and it holds this meaning and it's cared for kind of in successive seasons and then stabilizes into the kind of cultivars we have today. And so it's just to say, like, all the different varieties of Perilla as we know them kind of had to evolve from these wild species. And the reasons that people can be so particular as to, shiso is not a substitute for Tieto, is not a substitute for Kenip, is not a substitute for these lots of wild varieties that we collect seed for, is just kind of unique. And I think it's just a really beautiful part of how, just our cultures aren't monoliths, our communities aren't monoliths, our plant communities aren't monoliths, because they all develop in these relationships. And so I think that's just a piece that, whether it's about Perilla or other things that we're going to talk about in Seed Stewards, we wanted to just kind of plant this as a sort of philosophical seed with all of you, of just kind of what are those acts of reciprocity? What are the times that we sit with plants and we see a part of our respective histories reflected in each other? And how do we kind of carry that forward, right? Like if every seed is a time capsule that we're kind of trying to build upon and leave for future generations, like how does that responsibility sit with us? And I think for me, it's only through contextualizing history that we can think about keeping that culture alive for the future. So all of this to just say, it's not just solely nationalistic that people don't be called one thing. It's not just a matter of language. Perilla is seen as something that's sort of so simple, but actually like encompasses lots of these really kind of complex ways that plants have evolved. So with that, I will stop my sharing. And if people have questions, we'll hold it till the end, but I'm going to kick it over now to talking to Ilokin about how some of that interesting biochemistry means we have a very strong kind of plant ally in terms of our health and well-being.
Well, first I just got to start off by saying, like, literally everything Kristen ever shares about plants just like moves me to tears, you know. I'm like, okay, no, I gotta not cry right now because I need to talk about this plant, but you know, it's just so beautiful, like so beautiful the way you hold the respect and honoring of these plants and how it connects to our culture. And I actually feel talking about the medicine of this plant feels really intertwined with what you just talked about, and just loved like the deep nerding of talking about the different species, right? So I'm going to introduce in a specific species and some of its names. So the plant I'm going to talk about is, you know, Kristen talked a little bit about this, you know, some of the more wild varieties that originated from China. This is my ancestral medicine. Chinese medicine is talking about this specific plant here in the chat, Perilla frutescens. I'm very bad with Latin names, or Zitsuye. And this one is also called, I believe, red perilla. Is called purple perilla in Chinese medicine. And, you know, to build off of what you were saying, Kristen, around like the monoliths that get created, I want to acknowledge that what's called Chinese medicine has always been influenced by so many different countries, you know, all of so many East Asian, South Asian, Southeast Asian, and Swana regions of the Southwest African and Southwest Asian and North African traditions too. So in Chinese medicine, the way we work with this plant is all about the different parts of the plant, right? There's so much of it is metaphorical. So the leaves are one particular part of the medicine, and then the stem is another, and then the seeds, which people were talking about in the chat, are also seen as all their own medicines, but definitely related. So I'll talk about how each of them is worked with differently. And the way that that's been talked about, I'll kind of read a synopsis of how I broke down like these ancient texts, how they talk about the different parts of the plants. Is the leaves are light and lifting, so they will be used more for like bringing that energy up and out. So that's going to be more for helping us sweat out a cold or flu, fever, right? So their energy lifts us up. The stalks are firm and hollow. So those are helping to open and drain qi, to drain a pathogen when it gets clumped, right? So you can picture this as like a lot of phlegm in the chest, right? So you're going to have the hollow stem is going to open things up. And then the seeds, they're slippery. So that's going to be for moistening. So you'll think of that more when there's a dry cough, or also a lot for if the intestines are dry. So it's used a lot in constipation. So you start thinking about looking at the different plant, not only as different species, but like the actual different parts of the plant. Like metaphorically, as you look at this plant, as you observe it, as you eat it, what resonates with you, you know? And like to really think of this as yourself personally and your own relationship to this plant, what do you start to observe, right? So this is what's been passed down to me. So the leaf, like overall, this plant is works with what's called like the lung and the spleen. So those are both the organs, but it's also that system. So it's the respiratory tract and the digestive tract. So actually during COVID, Perilla has been worked with in different ways because COVID is something that specifically is a respiratory illness, you know, but so much of it impacts the digestion as well, because it's what's called the post-heaven qi. So pre-heaven qi is like what's passed down to us through our ancestors, through our parents. But then the post-heaven qi is what we get every day. So we're breathing every moment that we're alive. Hopefully we are breathing. So that's the upper respiratory system. And then hopefully we're also able to eat every day, right? So that's all post-heaven qi. This is what we take in every day. You know, when we eat, when we breathe, we're being impacted by what we're breathing in and what we're taking into our bodies. So this plant can come along and support us to have harmony in our respiratory system and digestive system. Does that make sense so far? Amazing medicine, love it so much. So the leaf, this one's in the category that's called acrid herbs that release the exterior. So acrid essentially means like that smell, you know, when you smell a fresh perilla, it's like really like wakes you up, you know. I love to eat the fresh perilla. It's very aromatic. So that's acrid, right? So that what that does to qi is it opens it up and it moves it out, right? So when we have these acrid herbs, they move our qi and specifically warm the qi. And so this is going to be really good for cold season, right? And so some of the pathogens that happen that can come from outside of the body are things like colds, flus, you know. We're about to get into that time. Perilla is a really, really good one for helping push things out, right? It's the leaf, and it's also an aromatic leaf. So it's helping push all the qi out of our body that has been invaded, the external qi. So really good for starting to sweat out a fever, right? Does that make sense? Yeah, you're welcome to put in any questions in the chat as we go. So this is a really good one for coughs. It's a really good one for if you're someone who, when you catch a cold, it goes right into your sinuses, you know, and you get like really sore sinuses. So you're gonna be thinking of perillas for this. And then it also specifically as something that's like very, very warming and very aromatic, it's really good for helping move the qi, as we talked about, the digestive system. So excellent for nausea, right? So if you've eaten something that doesn't taste good or like kind of feels a little off to you, really amazing to have. You could try some perilla tea. And specifically, it has an affinity for what do you call that? A morning sickness, right? It's safe. It's safe for people who are pregnant. So it helps take the qi dynamic. You know, our digestive system should be sending things down, but every once in a while it gets upset and it starts to send things up, right? So that's when we're vomiting. We might be having like hiccups, a lot of burping. So it's really good. Perilla comes in and it helps move it down. And as I mentioned, you know, especially the stalk is where it's really good for if everything gets kind of stuck, right? You feel like your chest or like really bloated, that's gonna help open things up and move it all the way through. So really amazing affinity for nausea and vomiting if people have low appetite. And then we get into starting to think about its friends, its community, right? So plants, they grow with each other, but they also grow with other plants and they get combined for very specific reasons. So if you think about, you know, if you think about perilla, it's often seen in Japanese food with ginger when there's raw fish involved. And so part of the reason behind that is ginger, it kills liver flukes and other kinds of parasites that live inside of raw fish. And then the perilla, what it does is together, those two actually help work together. So earlier at the very beginning, for folks who arrived, you know, at the very beginning of the call, some folks were talking about, I think this family was talking about how some of you are best at chopping, like when it comes to preparing the perilla. Others of you are better at pickling. Others of you are better at cooking. So each of the herbs also have their own strengths. But when you combine them together, they're helping each other do even better. So ginger and perilla both have the properties of helping with nausea and vomiting, but when you combine them, they have even more strength to be able to resist if someone ends up with seafood poisoning. So this has a long, long history of this combination together for seafood poisoning in Chinese medicine. And you know, you can see this in different dishes, like folks mentioned, and in our group, we talked about all these amazing dishes. And often these plants were combined together, these spices were combined together for a specific medicinal purpose, right? So a lot of hot pepper, a lot of garlic, a lot of ginger has been combined for ages because we didn't have refrigeration. So a lot of our food would go bad and people would often get sick, especially in summertime. So garlic is in many dishes because it helps treat dysentery, right? And it kills bacteria. So you start thinking about how do you want to combine your plants, because they're like herbs for herbs, you know? They're like, who do I want to work with to have even stronger impact in the body? So the leaf, just to review, really amazing tea for the upper respiratory system, right? It's for coughs, for being able to clear the lungs, and then really good for the digestive system, nausea, vomiting, morning sickness. And you start bringing in its friends like ginger, and it will make that make that particular medicine even stronger. So that's just the leaf, right? So then we get into talking about, oh, I'm trying to look at the times here. I can talk and talk and talk. So we get into talking about the stem a little bit. And the stem is really specifically for when everything gets stuck, right? So perilla leaf more for the colds and flus. You notice you're starting to feel like a little itching at your throat. You're gonna have your perilla leaf tea. You're gonna have some ginger in there. I like to make, for Kristen's family, I made a perilla and dazao, the dates, jujube, dried jujube together. I cooked that together to make a syrup. So it was like, you could do about like 1 part dried perilla leaf and then like a half part or even a third, because the dried jujube is really, really sweet. Cook that together. You could add like a cup of water. You're going to cook it down to about half and then add half that amount honey. And I can write out some of the recipes later in the Mighty Network. But you're basically making a syrup, and it's going to be really good for the digestion because jujube helps harmonize the middle, so harmonize the digestion, and also for if there's cough season. So it makes a really yummy cough syrup. But then you could add in that stem if you're like tendency to get really congested in the chest. And then if you're someone like me who gets pretty bloated after meals, you might just make an all stem vinegar or something and have a little bit of that vinegar after your meal to help with bloating. So someone also mentioned in our group making like a beautiful like sprinkle for food with the dried perilla. That sounded amazing. And some lemon zest. I think you said you added lemon zest. So citrus rind is actually excellent for digestion. And in Chinese medicine, it's often tangerine peel that's worked with. And it's like citrus season at different stages all the time. So you can try cutting up different citrus. And to me, I think really like follow your heart, like what is the citrus that you most resonate with, and try combining that with different perillas and see like what combination like tastes the best to you, either as a tea or drying it and making it into a sprinkle on your food. But I think so much of this is about, developing your own authentic relationship with these plants and recipes. And like, definitely we've been so fortunate to have so much passed down to us, and also honor like your own creativity and your intuition, because often that's both the plants talking to us and the ancestors talking to us. We listen, we get a little voice in our head. So try different things out and see what resonates with you. And then the seed, I saw a few folks writing about the seed. So the seed, often in Chinese medicine, a lot of seeds are seen as slippery. There are some exceptions, but oftentimes they're a little bit oily, right? You can extract oils from seeds. A lot of our oils come from seeds. And so that is all about moistening, right? So this is a really good one. It's worked with around wheezing and like coughs that particularly manifest with wheezing. So you could combine the seed and the leaf in a tea. If you're someone who it particularly tends to clump, you get a lot of phlegm and clumping. The little seeds kind of mimic the phlegm in our body, right? So little tiny things will help break up little tiny clumps of phlegm. It's kind of, a lot of things are metaphorical, and the way they look is like what they're helpful for in the body too. And then particularly, the cannabis or hemp seed is worked with a lot for moistening the intestines, especially. So if people have, especially in folks who are elderly or folks who have been through a long illness where the intestines can dry out, a lot of people who are on medication for a long time can get constipated. So those two are combined, they're ground up. So hemp seed and perilla seed are ground up and made into congee. And that's what's taken to help relieve constipation. So that's one you can think about working with in that way. And then as a recipe, I've actually never gotten to work with the seed just yet for this, but look forward to it, is to cook it lightly cook it in honey. So you add a little bit of honey and just like, low temperature until the seed basically starts to like absorb the honey, and that adds more moisture. So you want to, if someone's particularly constipated or the lungs are particularly like really, really hacking dry cough, you can lightly stir fry. It's called like a light fry with the honey, and that will add more moisture to the seeds. So that's how you bring in a little bit more moistening properties. So I'm gonna really quick, because I know it's like 5:25, do a little medicine making demo, because Kristen was like, "Yeah, show us something to make, you know?" So I'm just gonna tilt my screen down here and show you this beautiful perilla. I live in an apartment, and this perilla, the way I grow my perilla is essentially I mulch in what grew from the other year, anything I have extra. And the birds love it, and they dig it all up and they spread the seed. And essentially I rarely replant things. I just mulch things in, and then they come back and grow really happily wherever they've landed. So I'm gonna take this one up, and this is not, this is not Zitsuye, this is not the purple one, but I am going to, try this one out. You can try different varieties. So you take this beautiful herb, and I'm gonna cut it up really, really small as I can. I'm gonna dice it. And that's because essentially what we're gonna do, so I'm just gonna demonstrate, like, that's kind of how small I'm getting it, but get it as small as you can. I'm trying to talk and do this at the same time. Is you want it small because essentially what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this beautiful perilla and we're gonna cover it in vinegar. So I'm doing a vinegar extraction, but you can also do any 40% alcohol. So that's like vodka, tequila, brandy, anything that's 40%. And I'm gonna have fresh and dry, because you can do either. There's advantages to each. And again, I really recommend, like, try making one with fresh and try making one with dry and see what resonates to you. Because what resonates most with you, that's your medicine. Right? I personally love fresh. So I'm gonna put it all together, and we want it small because we want that vinegar to be able to extract that medicine really easily. So you think about this, it's like feeding steak to a baby. If I were to put like really, really, really big leaves in here, you can do that, absolutely. And you'll still get extract that medicine into the vinegar. But if you want to make it a little bit easier for all that vinegar to extract the medicine, you make it more like a smoothie. And then it's like feeding a smoothie to a baby. And that's a little bit easier for them to digest those nutrients. So hopefully that makes sense. So you cut it up real small. And so I have my perilla here, steak smoothie, exactly. And then I grated up a bunch of ginger. So I have its friend in here. So I have fresh ginger. I have fresh and dry perilla. And so together, this combination is going to be really good for the lungs or for the digestion, right? So I can use it interchangeably. Now for me, I'm thinking about upcoming cold and flu season. So I've gone ahead and cut up a bunch of hot peppers, and I'm going to add that to layer that in. So I have like a third perilla, a third ginger, and just like a little sprinkle, about like, a good tablespoon of fresh hot pepper. And the reason I decided to go that direction is because it's cold and flu season coming up, and I want to help, I want to really help along this process of breaking a fever if I get a cold or something like that. If I wanted to make it more digestive supporting, that's when I would take the tangerine peel or lemon peel and put that in instead of the hot pepper. So you start thinking about, what's my intention in making this medicine? Like, who am I making this for? Who do I want to combine? So I have all this medicine together, and I'm just going to cover it with apple cider vinegar. And you can work with any kind of vinegar, really. I like apple cider vinegar because I like the taste. And this is going to start extracting all of that medicine that's in here. And I'm going to cover it up. And yes, make it all small, because then that way that vinegar can really go in here and permeate that herb, whatever it is you're using, and really pull things out to the best it possibly can. Of course, you can always put like whole peels in here, whole ginger, whole shiso leaf. But when you're going for medicinal, we want it to be really potent. So that's why we chop everything really tiny. We're going less for flavor and more for like, let's get all of the medicinal constituents out as much as possible. So it just helps to make it smaller, the steak smoothie concept. So then we're gonna shake that up. And I'm going to say submerge your herbs, and then you're going to say submerge your herbs. So submerge your herbs, submerge your herbs. And basically when I open this, when I open this up again, I want to make sure there's no herbs sticking out of that vinegar. And there are. So I'm going to cover it a little bit more. And the reason you want your herbs submerged is you don't want any bacteria to be able to live on top of the herbs that are sticking out, right? You want it all the way covered. So I'm going to cover it again, and some vinegar might come over the edge, and that's fine. You just want to make sure it's fully submerged. And then in 2 weeks, you'll strain it. And then you can take about like a teaspoon of that every day as preventative medicine, or a tablespoon of it if you get sick. And I know we're right at 5:30, so it's as simple as that, you know, with your shiso. You can do one that's just all shiso, you know, and perilla, and try different varieties and compare them, you know, just like really have fun with it, and know it's super accessible, right? This is all of our ancestral medicine. And yeah, I hope you get to play with it. And like building off of what Kristen said, you know, try all these different varieties and see like, oh, like what is it like to build a relationship with the different ones? Thank you.
I had a question, which is just, should you make medicine at different points in the season then? Because I always just dry tea after I process the seed, and it's sort of like the tea is essentially like a byproduct, because I have to dry the plant anyway to thresh the seed. But should I actually be like you're saying, like all the different parts have different energy? Like, should I try to harvest it for medicine, like when that part is kind of at its peak energy, like, oh, the leaves are kind of like hitting their peak and plateau? Or is it fine to kind of just do it all at once?
It's a really good question, and I'm going to give you a cryptic and kind of creepy like Chinese answer, right? Okay, so in Chinese medicine, yes, everything is going to be like according to, you know, if you want to take it in the most yang part of the day, it would be from sun up to noon, right? You get the most yang energy of it. But if you want to preserve it, you know, and like work with it in fall, the fall is the time of the lungs. So it's going to have the most energy of the lungs at that time of year. But as far as the creepy part, so if you think about fresh and dry herbs, so Chinese medicine is very, very focused a lot. Most of the medicine is dry herbs. Is, let's say I'm a plant and it's harvest time, right? And so I'm here, I've been plucked, I am no longer alive. And you took me and you put me in a boiling pot of hot water, right? You boil me for about 20 minutes and you drink that water. It's going to have a flavor. It's going to have an essence of me. But if you take me and you put me on a drying rack, you leave me to dry out of the sun, and it, you know, I wither and I get more, you know, you come up and you touch me and I'm a little bit dry, and then you crush that up and you put that in a pot of boiling hot water and you drink it. Like imagine me all ground up and dried and put into hot water, and then you drink that. That's going to be a very different kind of flavor. It's a very different concentration. Usually, you know, I tell this analogy, I work with teenagers, I have them picture me as a human and like what that would taste like, right? It's like to really show you like the concentration is very different when you start to dry something out. So all that to say is there is an advantage to working with different times. I personally love fresh herb, you know, especially for folks here who are really good cooks. I'm not a great cook, I'm a practical cook. And I come from a food not bombs, like feed a lot of people, something that you can eat, but it doesn't necessarily taste amazing for myself. Background, I love everything like this fresh herb. I think it tastes incredible. But, you know, when you dry it and like make this, you know, as we were talking about in our group, the food sprinkle, that's going to have a very different properties. So I think it all comes back to trying different approaches. And then ask the plant, like that plant will tell you, you know, it will, one day you'll walk by that plant, you know, you've seen that plant every day and it's looking good. And one day you're like, whoa, you know, like this is, it tells you, it's like, I'm ready for the great harvest. And I think that's the nuance that I think for all of us to be able to welcome that back into our lives is like, listen, the plants have the wisdom. They'll tell us like, now is my time to be harvested.
And there was just some questions in the chat for you too about, do you need to crack the seeds when you use them, like in that honey mixture, or I'm not sure yet, Tam, if there was another specific instance, or you just kind of can use the seeds whole. And then also about, oh, you answered that, refrigeration with the vinegar.
Yeah, vinegars can last quite a while. As long as you submerge your herbs, it will last. So strain it after about 2 weeks and they'll last. And, you know, you can add honey to it. It's so delicious. You could make a Perilla honey, you know, doing the exact same thing we did, but work with dry only for honey, because fresh will have too much moisture in it and can make the honey go funky, unless you're really good at it, which I'm not. A naughty herbalist. So yeah, you can make the same thing. You do 2 weeks, cover it in honey, and then you strain out the honey, and then you'll have Perilla honey and add that to Perilla vinegar, and it's gonna be what? It's gonna be so good. Like you could do a fresh Perilla vinegar with a dry Perilla honey, and then you get it all, and it's amazing. But I haven't tried that yet, but I want to. So if anyone tries it, let me know. For the seeds, often they are cracked, yeah, just to get the most oil to kind of release from them. They get crushed, and then that's generally how they're worked with in Chinese medicine, at least. Yeah. But I think so much of things come from trying and comparing, you know, so try one preparation with them cracked and one with them whole, and, you know, finding out the difference. I really believe in the collective wisdom of trying things, you know, and seeing what feels most resonant. And same with alcohol. No need to refrigerate. With alcohol, it's generally 4 weeks that's recommended. So you could do a whole moon cycle and then strain it. And alcohol, often its advantage is it lasts longer and sometimes can pull out different constituents than the different medicinal properties than the vinegar does. But I personally, I love vinegar and think there's so much that you can do with vinegar.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. Well, the conversation can always continue on Mighty Networks. And so I would just encourage everyone, just keep sharing your recipes and sharing your stories. Yeah, we can keep posting things in terms of trying to document some of the ways to make medicine heading into the fall, just because all that medicine actually sounds really delicious too. And I feel like a lot of times, Alokan, if you taught me to make medicine, then I just end up drinking it way too fast, and then there's nothing to get me through the winter. So maybe this summer we can all prepare for cold and flu season ahead and all the uncertainty. And yeah, maybe even share and exchange like different Perilla medicine, different types that we're all growing. So yeah, everyone should just keep, you know, posting what you're kind of creating and different ideas that you all have, just because it was exciting to get to hear a little bit about what everyone is doing here. So hopefully it can just continue on, even though this is the end of the month. But thank you all, and we'll see you next month when we talk about cucurbits.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.
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 Thank you.